Hello, and again, welcome to Bit Def. I'm Santiago Ramones. Across from me is...
I'm Jackson Fritts.
I am glad to have you on here again, but this time it is extremely self-indulgent, and I get to talk about my music.
Oh, nothing wrong with that.
So we're talking about Orbit, which is the second track on Bloom. So what are your thoughts and what are your burning questions that you want to ask me about it?
Well, the first thing I noticed, or the first kind of question I asked myself is, okay, is there anything in this track that is not guitar based? And that's not a bad thing, because it's, number one, if it is all guitar based, that's really cool because there's some interesting textures that don't necessarily sound like a guitar. And before we go into that, there's one thing underneath the guitars that I thought was synth at first, like a very low pad, like a low bass pad of synth. But I think that's also feedback. So my question is everything on Orbit, is that all guitar?
Yes, it is all guitar. And
okay, nice.
So the first thing that you hear is that swell.
Yes.
That's just a like big thing, or I just hit a big A major chord and then reversed it, and so that's how you hear.
Oh, okay. And there's also reverse in that intro. Okay, I didn't notice. I noticed reverse later in the song with like the part of the riff you're doing, but I didn't know the beginning was reversed. In fact, it almost sounds like an electronic version of a gong. Like it has that drone to it, and it's very I don't know, it makes me think of like 2001: A Space Odyssey or something very big and cosmic or something like that. No, it's very neat.
I think part of that is probably also the reverb that kind of helps add to that kind of sound. It's a reverb that has a 10-second decay, and so it is a long boy.
Yes, it is. It's very spacey. I know that's a common phrase, but I mean, it really is very spacey, and not just the delay of duration of notes, but the whole atmosphere of it. Another thing I was going to ask, and this can kind of go along in this train of thought, is are you using a delay pedal for the main guitar part that starts everything out? Because it sounds like are notes being picked consistently, but there's a slight delay to them.
Yes.
Okay, nice.
So it is that like that thing is, I mean, without the delay, it sounds like this. And so having the delay in there just kind of gives it like a double picking thing.
Yeah, it almost sounds like tremolo. I don't know if that's the right word, but
yeah,
like a wave, like the wave is back and forth consistently. Yeah, it almost gives the implication of speed picking, like just a consistent picking. But is it or those like single notes you plucked and that's just the duration of those notes?
Yeah. So I especially at this time, I was kind of not a very good guitar player. I was just playing what I wanted to. Mm-hmm. And this whole album is like a exploration of like composition and production and all that stuff. I started it in 2013.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow.
And so at the time I was like, how do I make more sound with doing less things? And that's kind of I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing that maybe it makes me a worse guitarist or a worse musician, but it's
not
like,
at all.
Why do all of the work when the computer can do the rest of the work? And so I can, in a way, cheat that tremolo picking because my simple picking, I wasn't as satisfied with, I guess. And so that delay gave it
instrument.
More. Yeah.
Is the technique of the studio. I mean, just people like Brian Eno and, a lot of people that do soundtracks is studio techniques that may help them in a certain area that they're not as versed in. For example, Brian Eno, not to go on too long of a tangent, but he is more of a composer and arranger than he is an actual musician.
Right.
For example, he doesn't really play guitar but he can pick out textures and put notes together, whether they're in MIDI or they're separately recorded one note fragments, and put them together to make a composition. So that is something I respect heavily. And no, it's it's just studio's just another instrument and an expansion of that. So much respect.
And I really feel that too with like, I kind of identify more so as a composer than I do a singer or a guitarist or whatever else that I might do. Composer is kind of the main thing. And a weird thing about being a composer as opposed to being just a like music player is that I get to kind of pick the sounds and pick what is going to be played, and then other people or other things will play it. And so I'm not the one that's responsible for making the music happen. Something else is. And that's an interesting thing that it's weird because there's kind of like a negative connotation associated with that. It's like, oh, you can't do it all yourself. Like, are you just not that good? But I think over time I've accepted the fact that like, I'm not going to be the one to be doing the thing because I could spend so much time trying to master an instrument, but I'd rather spend my time making music and writing music, and I'll leave the mastery to people that either started whenever they were a lot younger or have
session
the time.
Musicians, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And have the time to really perfect that. But I like to lead more on the creation side.
No, that's beautiful. In fact, that's probably where I am right now. I'm a dabbler of instruments, but the thing is, sometimes there's just not enough time, and I need help playing parts.
Yeah.
So I respect and resonate with that very heavily. But I won't deviate too far. Another thing I was going to ask: was this inspired by anything non-musical, like say a dreamlike? Like a dream or a dreamlike state, or a fantastical sort of concept that's greater than life, would you say at all?
I think a funny thing about these early pieces is that some of them, a lot of the tracks on the album were just experimentation and just trying sounds. And so it's like I had gotten my audio interface and I was like, I can put sounds in the computer.
It's wild.
Yeah.
It's just freedom to any young man and woman.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wasn't even trying to go for a sound or something. This was really just like, what sounds can I make with my guitar? And so I recorded a loop, and then I was just playing with Ableton, and that's how Ableton works. It's like you make clips and then they loop, and then you can make another track and have another clip play that loop, and it's just kind of this interplay with the loops. And so that's really how this thing came out. It's all just a bunch of loops happening together, and it just so happened to be with guitar, which was the thing that I was using. And so like you have this loop, which is just like, I mean, you play that over and over again. It's literally just playing an A major chord. Do, 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 do.
Well, very drony.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And then,
and
then I took that sound and then reversed that. And then those two loops are playing the entire track.
Okay. Very nice.
Along with this one, which I guess what you had said sounded like a pad, but is actually just, it's part of the chord. Yeah, that's just looped over and over again.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So, and I also did wonder if there were loops involved, as well as there was I don't know if there's an actual delay pedal or a DAW setting to create the delay.
Pretty much everything is inside the box, all inside the box.
That's great. And the fact that, I mean, that's a cool challenge as a creator, is seeing what you can come up with that, even if it's like just a DAW setting, which some people are very accepting of DAW presets or DAW features, which is something I still don't know that much about. But it's cool that certain people don't have an ego with that, and they're willing to try things with software that they have, you know. And it's not always, I have to go out and get this, I have to go out and get that, but I'll use what I have, and then maybe I can come up with something with those materials.
Well, and that's the funny thing, because like I hadn't started going to ACM yet. I was majoring in vocal music education on main campus at UCO. And so what I was doing then was like practicing how to sing classically and operatically, and like learning music theory and scales and aural skills and all this stuff. And so like the music production stuff and all the recording stuff, I had no idea whatsoever. I was just throwing stuff at the wall, and that I just liked how it sounded. And so any sort of perception of like, oh, well, you should be doing this, or you shouldn't be doing that, or you should have a pedal, or why use everything inside the box? Like, I didn't know anything about recording. And so it was literally just like, what is this thing? What does that do? Oh, cool. That's what that does. And that's often how just became what it was.
Yeah, that's great. And that's often how a lot of good compositions start, is just not knowing where things will go. And it's kind of like you said, you know, throwing in a wall and seeing what comes back. And the result might, you know, be very surprising to you, what you can get just from playing, even just with playing with something as minimalistic as loops. You know, the whole concept, 20th century minimalists, you know, Terry Riley, Don Cherry, you know, they would play with tape recorders and of compositions they made, but then they would splice the tapes and loop them, and songs would come out of them, and these patterns would arise, you know, from the tape loops. And that concept, that's just very fun to play around with, because you can take a song, you know, like a song that already exists, and cut it up and, you know, make a collage from it almost. And not that that's exactly what you did, but I mean, the idea of creating something from a loop,
from something else. Yeah.
It's that lends a lot to creativity. You know, with playing with loops, you'll come up with some just crazy stuff, and then finding out how loops fit with each other, and see if you can, you know, match two different loops up. I mean, God, I mean, it's just like possibilities are endless with that sort of thing.
And speaking of the like matching two different loops up, this whole thing kind of arose with this kind of rhythmic idea of playing with different lengths of phrases and how the loops will interact with that. And so this is kind of the main two. And that would repeat twice, and then it would go to. And so those two are different lengths. The first one is a little bit longer, and the one before is just a little bit shorter. And so then whenever you stick these next to each other, they'll go at different lengths and play with each other. And that's kind of why this song ended up being called Orbit, is because I don't know if you've ever seen like a planetarium, and how all the planets and stuff are orbiting the sun, and then their own moons, and everything is kind of going at a different rate. And at some point, like, you know, stuff crosses over, and eventually, you know, rarely it happens, but like eventually there is a point inevitably where all the planets line up.
Right. It's kind of that like variations, and then there's so many of them, and then it's just kind of like that, a Rubik's Cube of just like, oh, bam, everything lined up for, you know, a certain amount of time. That's a cool concept, and especially to apply into music. There was a composition I heard by a band called Boris, and they have an album called Flood, and the first track is just different guitar loops, and it does exactly that. Sometimes they kind of line up but don't, and then occasionally they'll just meet in these weird spaces where they're constantly, two different rhythms are constantly creating combinations of melodies and riffs, and it's just this orbital changing metamorphosis, if that makes any sense.
Right.
And that your track does exactly that, I would say. And that's just conceptually, that's just a fun array of ideas that, just from, splicing different things together and putting things together as an experiment. I mean, just like the possibilities that show up can surprise the creator of that composition. And just that concept is I think is so fun.
Right. Well, you had actually mentioned the minimalists like Terry Riley or Steve Reich and Philip Glass, and
especially Steve Reich.
Right. Yeah. And I actually didn't know very much about the minimalists, and so later on, whenever I discovered their stuff, I was like, oh, this is what I've been doing for like years.
That's awesome.
And so the idea of like a phase where you have the two tapes playing and they're slightly out of sync with each other, and then all of the interplay that happens as they go in and out of phase. Orbit doesn't do exactly that, but it's kind of what it plays with. And so something else that I kind of wanted to add a little bit more. So like you had the two loops, and then I added a third one, which was even longer than the other two. And so it's a break from the other two because it's way longer and it's tonally different. But then to add even more loops to that, I then reversed two of them. So the second one, this one, got reversed to sound like. And then this one right? And so what kind of happens in that sense is like maybe at first we were only watching a system of 3 bodies that are orbiting one thing. And then by adding the other 2 reversed ones, I'm adding 2 more bodies to kind of interact with the other ones.
Yeah, it's almost like it is both very involving but also tranquil, because there are times when I listen to it. I think I listened to it about 3 times total, where I really spaced out and in a good way and like a relaxed way. Is it almost it's almost heavenly in a way, or I imagine like shot like the point of view you'd get in an airplane above clouds or something like that. Something very serene, I suppose. And it's not only that, but then when you really pay attention to listen to all the little working parts, that's a really fun thing to do. I love music that you can just be at peace and you don't have to think too hard, but at the same time, you can also investigate what each mechanical part is doing. And that's, it fits both of those moods very, very well, or both of those benefits of listening.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah. And I mean, since this is an ambient album, I guess, the weird thing is that like the whole album kind of meanders among genres anyways, but like it is kind of intended to be background music anyways.
Gotcha.
And so it is a bit repetitive at times. And this track, like the beginning of it is pretty repetitive. And so I kind of play with the idea of repeating something long enough so that you become familiar with it and forget that you're listening to it. And then once something changes, then you're sort of moved kind of from the background. If that makes sense. Right.
No, that's a great way to put it. And a lot of ambient can be like that, where it's one very repetitive part and then a slight variation comes on and you're like, oh, that's interesting, because that's a slight change up from what it's doing, but it still exists in that universe, that atmosphere.
Yeah.
And Brian Eno, like I said, he does that a lot. He was, I think he coined the term ambient.
Yeah,
I'm
basically.
not sure.
I mean, music for airports.
Yeah, the Apollo album with the moon, and there was another thing. I mean, there's lots of stuff he's done. It's hard to keep track of him, but he did stuff with Harold Budd, and there'd be like different fragments of piano with like reverb and chimes and stuff. And it's, apparently those were all like different loops coming into play with one another, which once again fits that sort of, concept of experimenting with that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's definitely something I want to play around with more too, because it's loops are just fun in general.
Yeah.
And seeing what you think wouldn't work somehow ends up combining puzzle pieces in a way, I guess.
Right. And that's the fun part of experimentation, really, is that you get to try stuff that you never would have done otherwise, or sometimes mistakes come in and it's a good mistake and you're like, whoa, something just happened there, and now I get to hear it over and over and over again. And so that's the fun nature of working with loops.
This is kind of a corny question. If this piece of music was to represent some kind of imagery, what do you see in your mind when you hear it?
So the funny thing is that like I sort of made bonus content, if you will, for the album. And so if you buy it on Bandcamp, you'll not only get all of the tracks, you'll get a bonus track. Woo. And you'll get a text file that kind of gives a short paragraph associating with each track. And then,
oh, that's so cool.
And then you get images associated with each track. And if you follow me on Instagram, you've probably been seeing these. And so each track has an image associated with it. And so what I see with this track is like I said, the image of like planets orbiting each other. And so the image that I ended up using, it's the moon during the day.
Okay.
The thing about the moon during the day is that whenever you see the moon at night, you're like, yeah, this is the thing that appears at night.
Right.
I know, like there's the day sun and then there's the night sun, and that is the moon at night.
Yeah, yeah.
But whenever you see the moon during the day, what it's telling you is that it's still there, even though it's not nighttime.
Right.
And so it's like,
it almost looks obscured. It's kind of hazy looking, in a way. And it's almost like, oh yeah, you can still see the moon during part of the day or the afternoon,
Yeah. And it's kind of a reminder that like this rock is orbiting our rock at all times, whether or not you forget about it. And then our rock is orbiting the big ball of fire. And so it's like everything is this sort of interconnected system. And so I feel like by looking at the moon during the day, you're sort of acknowledging the cycles of everything and the complexity of the interconnectedness of just our solar system, and then even greater into the universe.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic answer. And I love that concept.
If you wanted a corny answer to your corny question, there it is.
No, I'm glad I asked that, honestly, because I didn't even know about the thing where you're combining each song with a little text and then an image. And no, that's so funny that you did the moon during the day. And there was something I did, I think like 2 years ago now, it would have been. And no joke, there for one of the singles I did, there was a picture of the moon like during, I mean, it's more towards like when the sun was going down, and it was kind of like you could start to see it better, but it is still like, it's not really lit up as much. So that's funny that you also kind of have that intrigue with, just a slightly obscured moon, it's kind of like a, like you said, a reminder. And I always thought it was kind of funny as a kid too, is that no one really talks about the moon during the day, or, when you can't see it as well, but it is still there.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
No, that's neat. That's a kind of a neat, just, I don't know, it's a weird feeling. It is.
Well, Jackson, thank you so much for doing this with me and having this nice conversation about Orbit.
Absolutely.
Where can we find you and your stuff?
Well, right now, and I think this is where you said your stuff is too, is Bandcamp. That's where I've just been doing my stuff. Or you can see me babble incoherently on Facebook, but I wouldn't recommend that.
And I don't know how many Twitter bans you're through at this point. So,
oh goodness, that is just sheer boredom. So the positive side of my boredom is music. The negative side is just boredom on social media. So, off and on.
But yeah, so check out Chameleon Factory on Bandcamp. It's some cool stuff.
Thank you so much. No, I mean, I need to listen to the other tracks. And you said it's on Bandcamp to purchase?
Well, it will be on August 8th. And so...
Okay, because it's pre-order right now.
Yeah,
with the bonus tracks. Okay,
although
gotcha. Well, thank you.
You have the Google Drive link, and so you can listen to all the other tracks if you want.
It's cool talking to other people that have a fascination with not only ambient music, which is heavy mood listening, but also just fun little concepts that play around with very sparse notes or variations of notes. So that's a fun thing to talk about, man.
I'm glad you did it.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much.
And now here's Orbit in its entirety. find everything that I do on my website, santiagoramones.com. I make music. Bloom will be available on August 8th, streaming everywhere. Put it on in the background, put it on your workout playlist, show it to your friends so you can all enjoy it together. You can also buy the thing and get bonus content to get a bit deep into the emotions you can feel with it. I also make music with Power Cycle, an experimental electronic trio. Our first completely improvised album, Too Many Damn Cables, is streaming everywhere. More to come from Power Cycle in the future. To support this podcast, leave reviews, comments, tell your friends about it, and buy my music, because by supporting me, you're supporting the podcast. I always end the podcast with my 3 things. They shape my life philosophy. Those 3 things are: love never fails, it's going to be okay, I might be wrong.